Hello everyone, this is Neostem here, and today's video is going to be about how to make future bass like Illenium. In front of me here I have a little future bass remix of the Chainsmokers' Don't Let Me Down. I tried to make this in the sound of Illenium. We all know the sound, we're all familiar with it. It's a very distinct sound and it's very sought after.
Tiny fractures.
So without further ado, I'm going to play the track, starting from the build-up all the way until the drop, and then we will break it down element by element and seeing how we can get that Illenium sound. So, we will start very simple by seeing what the drums are doing. The drums are doing this very basic pattern, and there's a small percussion fill at the ending of the loop. The kick sample is actually ripped from an Illenium track. I found this one on Reddit. I'm not exactly sure which track it's ripped from, but all I know is that it was ripped from an Illenium track. So this is an authentic Illenium kick. As for the snare, it is from a sample pack by Cymatics, cleverly called Millennium. For the turnaround, on the second part of the drop, I just introduced a simple hi-hat. And right before the drop, there is this reverse kick sample. It is the same kick from the main drop, but just reversed and played right before the drop hits. The key to having this sound nice is to cut the transient from it. So as you can see here, I didn't just reverse the kick and put it into the audio channel. I actually took the transient part of the kick out of it so that it reverses nicely into the actual kick in the drop. The bass sound in this drop is not complicated at all. It is just a super saw bass and it sounds like this. Layered in with a sub that sounds like this. On the bass channel, I have this high-pass EQ to get rid of all the sub frequencies so that we can introduce clean sub from the sub channel. And this is what the bass sound is made up of. It's very simple, just two sawtooth waves with some unison on them and a filter. Mixed in, there's also some hyper and some chorus. You would be very surprised how much you can do with just two sawtooth waves, a filter, and some hyper and chorus. You can make leads, you can make chord sounds, pad sounds. This is a very, very versatile sound that you can use for pretty much anything in EDM. Moving on to synth sounds, and this is where the magic happens. We have here this main serum synth sound, which sounds like this, which is your standard melodic chord sound. Forget about the crazy processing going on. This is just to make the sound sit better with the mix. But for the sound itself, I have a little preset here. I called it God's Chords. And it's made of, you guessed it, 2 sawtooth waves playing 16 unison sounds, plus a sub that's also playing a sawtooth wave. And the key here is to grab the sawtooth from the basic shapes waveform, as opposed to the default serum saw. I found that this saw from the basic shapes wavetable has a little bit more oomph to it, which is very desirable when it comes to a main synth in a drop that's supposed to sound big and gigantic. The sound is also enforced with some hyper and some OTT. Layered in is another synth, just like the main one, but this time it's low pass. There is a filter on it and it sounds like this. There's also some reverb and delay, which gives it more depth and makes it sit well in the drop. This patch is made up of 2 sawtooth waves, the default ones this time, and there is an LFO controlling the amplitude of both oscillators. In the effects tab, there's some hyper, some compression, also mixed in some reverb and delay, like I said, to give the sound more depth. And to round everything off, there is the filter that makes this more low passed. Without the filter, it sounds like this. With the filter, it sounds like this. And this sound is made just to fill in those mid frequencies. It is supposed to enforce the main synth sound, not compete with it, hence the filter. Layered in on top of this is a lead sound, and it sounds like this. The sound is made up again of the basic shapes sawtooth wave with some hyper mixed in, some distortion using the dial to dialed into preference. There's also an equalizer to cut some lows, and to round everything off, just a compressor. No OTT, just a compressor. And externally, I have applied some reverb. This is Valhalla Room, and this is Repeater. Reverb and delay give this sound much more depth and make it glue in with the rest of the instruments of the drop a lot better. Up next, there are these vocal chops, which sound like this.
I need now, more. I need now, more.
The way I made these vocal chops is that I got the main acapella, played it with the chords from the main synth, and I just chopped the acapella, moved it around until I had a nice vocal melody that I can layer in with the rest of the synth sounds. There is some processing being done here. There is some auto-tune. I'm using Waves Tune Real Time. I'm using the virtual RIOT Nexus Reverb and Delay. You can find this on Reddit. Just do a quick Google search. And there's some EQ and compression. I'm using a plugin here called Vocal Writer by Waves. And what this plugin does is that it goes in, reads the information from your audio track, and it automatically tries to set the gain for your audio to sit right well in your mix. Now, this sort of plugin is usually frowned upon when it comes to mixing, but for the purpose of this drop, I'm just using it to slightly adjust the levels of the vocal chops, so I don't think it's a big issue that I'm using it here. And as you can see, it's not doing a lot. It's not changing the sound drastically, so I think it's quite appropriate to use it in this context. Up next, we have this clean guitar sound, which sounds like this. If you don't have access to a guitar, you can use a contact library. And if you don't want to spend money on a contact library, most DAWs have presets for e-guitar or jazz guitars. You can use those. This is just a layer. The instrument isn't very pronounced in the drop, so most listeners wouldn't be able to tell if this was a real instrument or not. You would be surprised of how much this guitar part brings into the drop. So without it, the drop sounds like this. And with it, it sounds like this. Next, we have these pads, which sound like this. These pads are from the famous virtual RIOT Atmos pack, And the way I layered these is that I actually tried to match what the chords are doing up here. So as you can see in the MIDI, there are two chords that are being stacked on top of each other. So I tried to find a pad sound for each one of these chords and then stack them just the way they are stacked in these chords right here, making any necessary changes, of course. And finally, there's some white noise samples. And as we all know, these samples give the drop just that little bit extra push to make it hit even harder. The sidechaining is done by a plugin called Shaperbox by Cable Guys, and it's triggered through MIDI. So the way this works is that you would route everything that you want to sidechain to an audio track that has this plugin on it, and you would make a MIDI track and route the MIDI from that track into the sidechain track. So whenever you play a note on that MIDI track, you actually trigger the sidechain. So you would just match the MIDI on this channel to the MIDI on your drums, and you would have instant sidechain. It's also important to note, if you're using this plugin, that at certain tempos, you may want to experiment with different loop lengths. If you don't want the sidechain to be as intense as it is in my track, you can try dropping down to 1/4 or even 1/8. So that is pretty much it for the drop. If you want me to go through the rest of the track, or maybe explain some of the orchestral elements that are being used in the build-up or even the verse sections, make sure to leave a comment down below and I will get to work on that right away. Now with that being said, I thank you very much for your time. I thank you for stopping by the video. If you liked it, please make sure to leave a like. If you have any questions, make sure to leave them down in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe, and as usual, have a nice day.